On behalf of Christy Jansen and our board of directors, our sponsors, and all of you who make this possible, welcome to our lecture with Dr. Kara Cooney. Before we get started, I want to thank some of our sponsors, because without our sponsors and our generous donors, none of this would happen, and we are delighted it is happening. So I'm going to share their names with you, and after that, I will ask you to join me in the happy sound of congratulatory applause that I know you'll be happy to share with them. Today's discussion, as well as Lost Egypt, Ancient Secrets, Modern Science, is brought to you by Valmont Industries, and some of those folks are here today. And we're still seating people, as you can see. We had a long wait list to hear Dr. Cooney. So those folks will be coming in as I do this. First National Bank, the Douglas County Commissioners, Peter Kiewitz Sons, Inc., the Durham Society, Lynn and John Boyer, Susan and George and I saw you here. Susan and George Haddocks, the Parker Family Foundation, the David Scott Foundation, Ada and Leon Millard Foundation, and additional support by Dr. Jack and Kathy Lewis, and our media sponsors, WWT, Channel 6. Let's thank everyone together. Thank you so much. One thing we love about our wonderful city is the ability for all of us to come together to bring amazing programming to all of us here in this town. Today's event has a bit of a textured feel to it. We're going to, after I speak, which will be brief, have Dr. Cooney come up and join me. I will leave the stage. She will give about a 45-minute discussion on her topic, which is an enormous expertise in ancient Egypt and Egyptology. She is an Egyptologist, so if you haven't met one, this is how one looks. Following that, we will have a Q&A. We'll have some runners in either aisle. You'll have Virginia and Catherine helping out with that. We will have microphones. If you ask a question and you're very polite, Dr. Cooney may call on you. And then the microphone will come to you, and we'll ask that you wait to speak until the microphone reaches you, because this is also being taped by our friends at KIOS for rebroadcast. And KIOS is an Omaha Public Schools radio station facilitated by our friend Bob Coate. So after that, there's more, a dessert reception. So if that isn't enough, we get to also have a bit of community with each other. I have had the incredible pleasure of spending some time the last 24 hours with Dr. Cooney. And I will tell you that in addition to being an innovative researcher, an amazing scholar, a discoverer of information and knowledge and new things about coffin research, in addition to all of that, I have found her to be very adaptable. We shuttled her around. She got here from the airport last night. We shuttled her directly into the Durham to an empty conference room where we said to her, Dr. Cooney, I hope you enjoy signing these 40 books. And we gave her a water, and she signed them. And then we took her to dinner. And today she met with students and educators from Creighton and UNO. And she had an opportunity to also have a luncheon with individuals. She met with some of our sponsors and donors and friends before tonight, and now she's going to spend some time with you. So with that, I will ask you to give a big Omaha welcome to Dr. Kara Cooney.
Thank you, guys. This is amazing. I like Omaha. Never been before. It's nice. It's really nice. And everyone's like, you've never been before. What did you think it would be like? I'm like, thought it would be more Montana-ish. You know, more like people would greet you and go. And instead, they're all, hi, welcome to Omaha. It's great. It's really, really good. So if I could get I see them working, removing. Do I have to do anything? No. It'll happen. It'll happen soon. It's good. And someone's running, so this is a good sign. Please. good. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's get started because I know I have 45 minutes and I always have too much to say. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. So this is my normal academic existence. I teach at UCLA, and writing books that are full of narrative and conjecture, this is not the way to get tenure. This is the way to get tenure. So I've been engaged in a 6-7 year, I can't even remember, study of ancient Egyptian coffins of the 19th, 20th, and 21st dynasties. And I've collected about photographs of 300 of these objects. And during the Egyptian Revolution, and after the birth of my son in 2010, I decided to stick to Europe. And so I've been traveling from Berlin to London to Paris to Rome and Vienna. It's been horrible. And so I've been doing that every June and some Christmases for the past 6-7 years. And this book is long in the making. It'll take me probably another 3 to 4 years to actually write it. It'll be my magnum opus, if you like. And it's very data-driven. It's very complicated research. I have to keep track of all of these coffins and the names of the coffins, the museum, and whether it was reused or not. And I'm looking specifically for coffin reuse. And I don't have time to talk about that right now. And this book was a kind of pause for me, a breath, if you like. I just received tenure at UCLA, and I was approached by a book agent out of the blue who said, you know what, I think you need to write a book about Hatshepsut. And I said, I can't write a book about Hatshepsut. This is this female king that we'll be talking about today. And he said, well, why not? Why can't you write a book about Hatshepsut? And I said, with no irony, I said, well, she's 18th dynasty, and I do the 19th dynasty. And he goes, Kara, come on. But this is the way academics think. We like to put ourselves in our little boxes, and it's safer that way. You don't want to leave your little box. And he said, don't you want to write a throwdown on women in power? And I thought, well, maybe. That's interesting, women in power. And so, I thought about it for a while and eventually said yes. And then the first thing I did was I started a new class at UCLA called Women in Power in the Ancient World. And it's now a GE, General Education class at UCLA. And so in a way, I taught my way into this book. And the book has just been assigned to students for the first time. It was assigned to students this last winter and will be assigned again. And it was a way for me to understand Hatshepsut's context. And so what I'll present to you today will be a discussion of female power today, a discussion of about 10 females in the ancient world who were able to achieve the highest levels of political power, and then a discussion of Hatshepsut and how she did it. And we'll see if we can get through this in 45 minutes. Okay, so I said women in power today, right? When this slide goes up, it's the first slide that goes up in my Women in Power class in the ancient world at UCLA, and I usually get a pretty visceral response. And we spend about 20-30 minutes with this slide and with this slide. And we go back and forth between the two. And it's an extraordinary thing, the ideas that the students have when they're looking at this imagery. And to conclude, and I know I don't have time to throw questions at you guys right now, but essentially, we're worried about clothing and hair. We're distracted by jewelry. We're distracted by makeup. Anyone care about the haircuts or the neckties on these guys? Not really. So all the guys in the audience, getting dressed is very, very easy when you're going to your workplace. It is not so easy for the chicks. You may disagree with the politics. Some are more to the right, some are more to the left. But when we look at this slide, you might think, well, they're not smiling. You might think they seem angry. You might be hostile to female power. You might be intensely proud and think, look at those women and what they did. This is extraordinary. But I think none of you will deny that this is unique. This is an unusual thing. This is an aberration. This is, to get to these pinnacles of political power, these women had to overcome many obstacles in their paths, and they were able to do this. And so we look at this with hostility or pride. There's not much in between. It's a lot of strong emotions about this topic. And yet what they did in each case is pretty extraordinary. This is normal. This is what we expect. The male at the podium, if he has a scowl on his face, and I don't think people will call him bitchy, I think it'll just be normal and he's powerful. And this is what a patriarchal society gives us. This is an expected thing. This is the kind of thing I try to break down in my class at UCLA. And we start with the discussion of cognitive differences in male and female approaches to power, and many different ways of dealing with this. And I start the next week, we jump into hunter-gatherers and discuss how a female survives versus how a male survives. And I'll probably come back to that a little later in the talk. But first, what is power? It's a big thing. I didn't want to teach a class at UCLA that was women in the ancient world. That exists at every university. We talk about the hearth and the home, and we talk about women and childbirth and how they're in the domesticated spaces once you achieve complex civilization. I wanted to talk about women and power and why they're specifically excluded from it then in the ancient world and to a large extent now. If you don't believe me, I've got some slides to prove it. I'll show you. But I like this book by Michael Mann, University of California at San Diego, and he broke down power into 4 different parts: ideological, economic, military, and political. The ideological, and I don't say religious because there's many a good communist out there that doesn't believe in God, but uses ideological power with impunity, yeah? Even mummifying the bodies of their dead leaders in a religious way, but there's not a religion there. Ideological power is extraordinary. It can be neither proven nor disproven. If I put somebody before you and I say, God chose this person, and you believe in that God, and you saw a spectacle that proves that to you, you're probably going to go along with this situation. It's a very, very powerful thing, and I think this election is proving that. Military power is pretty easily understood, right? Who's got the bigger army? Who's got the bigger guns? Who's got the bigger tanks? Notice how all of these things intersect. Right? If I have God on the side of my army, then this will be easier. If I have more money to pay my army or to build it, this will be easier for me, right? There's no hard lines between any of them. Economic power, who has the most money? That's pretty easily understood. And money can certainly, as we all know, buy you power. Hatshepsut understood this as well. We'll get to that in a bit. Political power is a little harder to understand. It's fuzzier. Political power essentially is, how do I get all of these people to go along with this idea? Do I have to pay them? Do I have to threaten them with my military power? Do I get them to think that God chose this for them? Do I use my special oratory skills? How am I going to, do I build factions? How am I going to deal with this? Political power is the fuzziest to define, but it is an extraordinary means of combining all 4 of these different elements. I do think that Michael Mann could have added sexual power to this, because whether you are a man or a woman, gay or straight, whatever your sexual identity is, will determine how much ideological power you can have, or what kind, or military power and what kind. And let me go into that right now. So I don't think it's a surprise to many of you that political leaders of state who are females are rare, few and far between. And when they do come to power, it's very often a crisis that allows them to do this. In India, for example, if somebody is assassinated, you might see a female member of the family come to power, even in a democratically elected society. This has happened in South America recently as well. This country still has not elected a female president. We elected a black man before we elected a female president. I think that's an extraordinary thing. If I almost said Elizabeth Warren, ooh, that tells you what I want to have happen, but it won't. If Hillary Clinton is elected, if Hillary Clinton is elected president, then I suspect those next 8 years will be a discussion of misogyny in the way the last 8 years have been a discussion of racism and how race plays into politics. It's an interesting direction that we're going into. But it is a rare thing, and I don't think that any of you will be surprised at that. Given that many of us work in more broadly understood political systems with parliaments or congresses or groups like this, okay, we can look and see how many women make up these groups, and we're talking about 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5. It's not 50%. So it's improving, but improving slowly. Europe does a little bit better than the United States. Canada does better than the United States. But, you know, the numbers are creeping up, but nowhere near 50%. When we human beings have the ability to give women economic power, we usually run screaming in the other direction. So we look at this slide here and see that worldwide, we're talking about less than 3% of females acting as CEOs. The United States, the number is actually a little bit higher. It's more at 4.2% right now. And Canada is very enlightened at over 6%. So if we have the chance to give women power over money, this is not something we feel comfortable with. And when the free market is there pushing this, and you have shareholders who might be worried about a woman who has a child, then you have all kinds of pressures that will act against this eventuality happening. And I always think of Marissa Mayer, CEO of Yahoo, and when she was named a CEO and then got pregnant and had a baby, and then it's all over the news. Everyone's freaking out. My God, how can Marissa Mayer have a baby and be CEO of this company, Yahoo, simultaneously? She cannot do it. And there were pundits left and right saying, yes, she can, and no, she can't. And I remember I was at home on maternity leave with my young son going, she can't do it. There's no way she can do it. It's impossible. So I like to, in my discussion of these topics, be as practical as possible because the female body is different from the male body. And how many women have given birth in this audience? Hands? It's not easy. And those 2, 3, 4, 5 years after are especially not easy. Does it help you gain power in the world, dealing with those children, breastfeeding, chasing after them? This is not an easy thing. I'm not saying that men can't chase after children, but anyway, since we have the womb, this is something, we have to gestate the child, we have to breastfeed the child, and God help you if you don't breastfeed now, then you're doing horrible things to your child. It's a lot of investment, and it is, now we're in a place where, I teach at UCLA, they give me a significant amount of time off so that I can go to crazy land, and I'm serious about that, and then come back healed and more myself, and then go back into the workplace. And if I did not have that, I would not have power at my university. I need help from my system and my institutions to allow me to have that power. So now, interestingly, in the military, and I apologize, there's no Coast Guard on this. My father was upset because he's auxiliary Coast Guard and he trolls up and down the Houston Ship Channel and looks for terrorists or dead bodies or things like that. He loves it. No Coast Guard. But if you look at the American military, you will be surprised to see that when you're in a hierarchical situation and you have people at the top who realize, I want female officers in my military. This is a useful thing. It will change quickly. And in the last 15 to 20 years, we have gone from almost no female officers to about 20% in every branch of the United States military except the Marines, no surprise. It's not the way they roll. Maybe it'll improve with time, but 20%, a number of female generals, this is changing quickly because people see that it's useful. It's not a free market situation, right? We're not asking shareholders. We have people in charge who see that it's useful, that people can work together, and it happens. Having said that, you don't think of feminine power and military power going hand in hand. This is not something that we think belongs together. Most countries that allow females in the military do not allow females in combat. And there's this discussion about how that happens. And this weaker sex, if she's in a more violent state and is captured, then she's going to be tortured in a different way than a male. You will understand what I'm saying. And so females are often excluded from combat zones and so don't have the same access to power that men do. But looking at the map, you can see female power in the military is something against which many obstacles are placed. And I don't think that's a surprise to anybody here. Even though we're using guns and tanks and not the brute force of our bodies, as you would have in the ancient world, it's still a significant way that we think. The biology is always with us. The biology always follows us. I can't even find a slide for female power and religion today because women essentially have no power in religious institutions. So I'm assuming most people in this room are part of the Judeo-Christian, Islamic, Mormon community. Hey, it all goes together, right? It all comes from the same source and then develops from one to the next. And this group of religions all have scriptures that outright or in a more understated way exclude women from power. So I think it should be no surprise that women do not have power in the Roman Catholic Church, and I'm talking about hierarchical power, or other Christian institutions. Now, if you go to a Protestant church and you have a female pastor, that's great, but look higher up in the hierarchy and see if there are women higher up. Usually not. And you think, okay, but what about Hindus? No, women do not have power in the Hindu tradition. You think, oh, Buddhists, they're super enlightened. There's a Lotus Sutra that says that a woman must become male for a brief period of time to become enlightened. And then she goes back to being female. It's very similar to the ancient Egyptian idea that a woman has to become Osiris for a short period of time so that she can sexually manifest herself as Osiris, have sex with herself, recreate herself. I won't go into details. They're taping, it's the radio. Maybe he can edit now. I ruined it, I'm sorry. And so in Buddhism as well, women are excluded from power. Now, let's move along. So I think I've established that women and political power in the modern world, that we still have problems, right? We still have obstacles. We still have barriers. And I think there's some underlying hostility there that we don't completely understand. Now, before I jump back into the ancient world, and I will do so with the next slide, I want to apologize for those of you that love Catherine the Great, Elizabeth I, Mary, Queen of Scots. These are amazing women, extraordinary women. But their systems of government are very different from the ancient world, so I will exclude them from the discussion today and look more into pre-fall of Rome examples. Now, I'm going to give you about 10 women who achieved extraordinary political power, and I will do so in chronological order, and you will notice that most of the examples come from ancient Egypt. And that shouldn't, well, it surprised me at the beginning, and I kept thinking, you know, this women in power class at UCLA, and I do a week on Rome, and I do a week on Greece, and a week on Persia, but I have to spend so much time with Egypt. What's going on? Why did the Egyptians allow so many more women into situations of power than elsewhere on the globe? And so I start with a map to give you an idea of how ancient Egypt works. It's a very different and unusual place, unique on this globe. It's protected on four sides: Mediterranean Sea to the north, two deserts on the east and on the west. To the south, you have a strong desert expanse, and you also have cataracts, big granite boulders that block your travel further south on the River Nile. So even though the river's there, you can't go further south. So you're talking about a place where one culture, one religion, one political system can stay and gestate and develop over time, over millennia. This is unique on the entire globe. There's no other civilization that has the same religion, same culture, same political system for so many thousands of years, so that when I have to learn Egyptian, when I was a grad student, I had to take Old Egyptian, Middle Egyptian, Late Egyptian, Demotic, Coptic. It's blows the mind. And then I'm like, I'm going to stick with the Late Egyptian because all this other stuff is hard. Ancient Egypt doesn't have to deal with constant invasion, constant political competition. Compare this in your mind with what you hear every day from Northwest Asia. And you're like, where's Northwest Asia? Northwest Asia would be the modern Middle East. Think of what you hear from Syria. Think about ISIS. I like to call it Islamic State because ISIS is a beautiful goddess. Think of what you hear from Lebanon repeatedly, from Iraq. It's a place where you don't have the same geographic boundaries, where ethnicities are in constant competition with one another, where a king in the ancient world could live for 8 to 10 years before Hammurabi comes in and takes him over, and that was doing pretty good. It's a constant dealing with building your army up, making sure you have coalitions with different city-states. You have different coalitions building and then breaking up. Egypt doesn't have to deal with this. Egypt is protected. Egypt can have a political system where people value stasis. They value continuity. This is part of the reason we love ancient Egypt so much, because by the time Hatshepsut came to the throne, those pyramids were already a couple thousand years old. That's an extraordinary continuity that we want to be a part of and we want to understand. This continuity, lack of political competition, lack of warlording, if you like, allows divine kingship to develop in such a strong way that if something happens to the king dies suddenly, unexpectedly, leaves behind a 10-year-old child, and everyone's like, oh my God, he's 10. Any of you want a 10-year-old running your household? Know any 10-year-olds? This is not a useful thing, right? Everything's going to go horribly wrong. So you have a 10-year-old child, you can think, let's have, in Greece or in Rome, the 10-year-old child's not going to last a minute. Some strong man with an army is going to come in and take the situation in hand. In Egypt, this 10-year-old child is divine. He's been chosen by the gods. An oracle has picked him as the next king. They're going to protect the dynastic line at all costs. And so a woman will be invited to come in as regent for that 10-year-old child. And that woman is usually his mother. Let me put it this way. If you have a 10-year-old child, you support the dynastic line, you want this to continue. Are you going to invite the uncle of this 10-year-old child, the brother of the dead king, to come in and rule? Or will you have a woman come in and do it? Which way will invite stasis and continuity? Certainly the woman. And I'm sorry to all the men in the audience, but testosterone does invite violence. And if we look, I know, and they're looking at me. It's okay. Just look at the prison system and how many men versus women. That's all I have to say. So the uncle is more likely to build an army, to warlord against the 10-year-old, to create a faction and to take the power for himself. The mother of the 10-year-old, on the other hand, will do everything in her power to make sure that she builds coalitions politically, that she moves things ideologically, economically, to make sure that her son is set up for power. And we see this happening repeatedly in Egypt. So the geography brings on an interest in continuity, which brings on the creation of this divine kingship that is not doubted. People believe in it. The elites believe in it. So something that is supported to such an extent that even when there's a chance to, the king is dead, let's build up an army, people don't do it. They say, yeah, we'll have that woman rule over us. That's an extraordinary thing. And it's something that really only happens in Egypt, to some extent China, and I'll bring up a couple examples in a bit. So my first example is this woman, Merneith, who began her rule as a regent for her young son, Den. We don't know how old he was. We don't know how old she was. We don't know hardly anything, because this woman ruled around 3000 BCE, the very infancy of the Egyptian state, the first regional state on the planet. And when the archaeologists found her tomb, and her tomb is this reconstruction right here, they found some jewelry. They found this could be her hand right here with this jewelry. The hand has since been thrown away. They kept the jewelry. Unfortunate. But the tomb, archaeologists found this tomb, and they found all around it these subsidiary burials. And they said, okay, this looks like the other royal burials at this place of Abydos. This is a royal graveyard. This is an interesting thing, because essentially the kings of the first dynasty decided, as so many early first kings do, to demonstrate their power through violence. And these kings had the sons and daughters of courtiers and priests stood up in front of them, and then they were all strangled or poisoned. Their bodies show no stress or fractures. So something happened, like strangling or poisoning. They had them murdered in front of elite onlookers, to increase the keening, to increase the mourning, to make the burial of that king worthy of a god, and to have that god accompanying in the afterlife with his barber, his priests, his wives, everything that he needed in the afterlife. And we see that this burial here has the same. And then the archaeologists found this stela, and they said, well, okay, something's up here, something's weird. There's no Horus bird, there's no hawk at the top of the stela. This doesn't belong to a king. This belongs to a woman, it seems. They start looking at the king list. They start figuring out. This belongs to a queen named Merneith, who never established her power formally, who ruled on behalf of her young son, Den, who was probably 10, 11, 12 years old. We don't really know. And who, it seems, relinquished that power when he came to the throne more mature, 15, 16, 17 years of age. But look at how she's buried. It seems that until her death, she was treated with reverence, with esteem as a king. And this is our first female to really show what real political power is in the ancient world. Now we have to move from Dynasty 1 to Dynasty 12. So we're going to skip 11 dynasties and move to this woman, Sobekneferu, who is the first woman to formally identify herself as king. The other thing about ancient Egypt, because it's protected on all four sides and you don't have all of these wars and constant battles, think of what you hear about on the news, what the Islamic State is doing in Iraq and Syria and how much cultural heritage they're destroying, right? Statues, temples, Nimrud was destroyed and jackhammered. I can't even watch these videos because, of course, for me, it's awful. But because of the amount of competition in that part of the world, there's less material culture. There's less stuff. Ancient Egypt, on the other hand, because of the amount of continuity and stasis and the appreciation for it by the culture inside Egypt, I've even got a statue. I've got Merneith's tomb to show you on a slide. I can show you a statue, headless, yes, but I can show you a statue of Sobekneferu as well. And here we can see how she depicted herself as king. And she's showing herself with a dress. These are the straps covering her breast. She's got a necklace on. And she puts on the Nemes headdress, the same striped headdress that you can see on Tutankhamun's mask. And then she ties on here a royal kilt. So she essentially lies to no one. She says, I am a woman, and I'm going to cover myself with kingship. The Egyptian women, and this woman was the first who became kings, did not call themselves queens. Queen is just a concubine of the king, a vessel for the king. It has no connotation of political power. King is what Sobekneferu needed to call herself, and she did, and she dressed as such, and Hatshepsut will do the same. Now looking at her pattern, how she fits into this rubric of female power, Sobekneferu is not going to act as a regent, but she's also part of a dynastic succession. Her father dies without an heir, and I have no idea how this could possibly happen in ancient Egypt. This is a risk-averse place. This is a place that invented the harem, a place where a king wants to gestate 300 lives of potential kings outside of himself at one time. How could he possibly not have a male offspring? The details aren't known to us. Maybe there was disagreement about the choice of heir, but they end up taking a man from outside of the royal family, marrying him to Sobekneferu. So he comes in through marriage to her. And then this guy dies. So he dies shortly after, just a year or two. And she decides, I'm taking the kingship for myself. I will do this. And like most women in the ancient world who rule alone, she only rules for a short period of time, about 2 years. And like most women who rule in the ancient world, she has no genetic legacy. And this is just a biological truth. Females don't breed as quickly as males or as efficiently as males. And in this very unequal pyramidal system, you want to have as many babies produced as you possibly can. That is a risk-averse position to take. To put a female at the center of that system is not mathematically or biologically a smart thing to do, because she can only have one baby a year, right? You want to have a male at the center of that system and then surround him with females so you can have as many babies produced as you possibly can. Again, it's not about intellect, it's not about ability, but it's about biological ability. It's about the continuity of the dynastic line, which for the Egyptians was the most important. But remember, it's that continuity, that interest in continuity of the dynastic line that allows the females to come in more often than anywhere else in the world. Already 10 minutes? You're kidding me. It's impossible. Did you get that on the radio? Oh my God. So we got to skip some females because otherwise I'll keep going. Okay, so Hatshepsut, we're getting to her. And then I'll skip over Nefertiti and I'll hear horrible sighs and moans from the audience because they'll want to hear all about her, but I don't have time. I know, see? So Hatshepsut dealt with a dynastic succession issue of her own. And here she is, God's wife of Amun, important priestess. She's the daughter of a king, the wife of a king, the sister of a king. Yes, she married her half-brother, but she never has a son. She's never the mother of a king. And that's the strange twist of fate that will pave her entire path towards eventually becoming the king. Her husband and half-brother dies and leaves her with a nursery full of 2-year-olds. So you can imagine, in the ancient world, you're like, okay, fine, we just put a 2-year-old on the throne. What's the problem? But even in this risk-averse place that appreciates continuity, they also know what life expectancy of a young child is. Does anybody here watch Game of Thrones? Do you know the scene where they're breastfeeding the 7-year-old or 8-year-old or whatever, and it's all creepy and weird? Well, the ancient Egyptians knew that breastfeeding gives immunity to a child, and they probably breastfed the successor of Thutmose II, the half-brother who died. This would be Thutmose III, probably way beyond anything we would consider seemly or proper, because most of the people that Hatshepsut is trying to convince that she should be regent for a son who is not hers, is her half-brother's, for her nephew, know what child mortality is. All of them have held dying babies of their own in their arms, watched them turn blue, watched them go lifeless, and bury them underneath the floors of their houses. Everyone in Egypt knows that they buried half of their children, that this is something that they've faced themselves. And Hatshepsut is standing in front of them and saying, my half-brother's died. Look, we've got this child. The God has chosen him. Yes, I know he's 2. And they're like, wait. The priests and the courtiers and elites are saying, you want us to assume that you as regent can keep this kid alive, number 1. And number 2, that you're going to rule for him, not for 2 years, not for 5 years, but for 7, 10, 12 years until this kid turns 16 or 17 years old. It's crazy what she convinced everyone to do. They look at her and they say, you're not even this kid's mother. What if you act in competition to him? This is all a little bit strange. And yet, the Egyptian interest in continuity, keeping the dynasty alive, knowing that this being is considered a god, they all jump They all go to the cliff, and they jump off with her. And she rules as regent for this kid for about 7 years. And when he turns 9, approximately, we're guessing, she then names herself formally as king alongside him. And you have an upside-down co-regency where the person who came to the throne second is the one who's primary in the position. And they finish out that kingship, and she rules as regent and king all together for 22 years until at her death, she's buried in state with respect as a king. And she ends up saving her dynasty, doing everything right, everything traditional, and no one here can pronounce her name. Maybe a couple. I've met a couple people who can. Okay, Nefertiti I don't have time to deal with. Ruled after Akhenaten, extraordinary woman, bust in Berlin, done. Tawastert, forget about it. Jezebel and Athaliah, notice I have no statuary for these women. I only have Betty Davis. But both of them, according to the Hebrew Bible, made inroads into political power. Jezebel ended up being thrown out of a window and eaten by dogs because she wanted to worship other gods in addition to Yahweh. She grew up in a polytheistic society. No one should be surprised by this. Athaliah, her daughter, ended up ruling as regent for her son and tried to take out political competitors militarily. And she herself ended up being assassinated when the priests of Yahweh put her grandson in charge as a puppet ruler. Jezebel is not remembered fondly. We remember the women who did things wrong. We like to write about them. We do not remember the women who did things right. I don't have time to talk about this woman either. It's kind of cool. Sleeps with a woman that has him, sleeps with a man that has him killed. She's pretty awesome, but I don't have time. Empress Le Ji, I've been told to say, ruled for 16 years. She rivals Hatshepsut. She's the closest that we see in terms of political power, the ability to rule. But like Hatshepsut, she never rules alone. She always rules with someone else on the throne. She's empress to her husband, he dies, and she's dowager empress to her son, and then she's dowager empress to her grandsons. And she kept her son in line by tormenting him. Apparently, she took his favorite concubine, cut off the nose and limbs of this poor girl, threw her in a pigsty and said, now your girlfriend's a pig. How do you feel about that? And if you think, oh my God, how this woman, she's so violent, just read the other Chinese history and what the men did and you'll be shocked. It's pretty extraordinary. But like Hatshepsut, she also had no dynastic succession. So the fruit of her womb will not be the next king. And then Cleopatra, we know well. Shakespeare's written plays about her. We love to talk about her failings, her being bitten by an asp and committing suicide. This woman, like Hatshepsut, ruled for a great length of time, 21 years to Hatshepsut's 22. And like Hatshepsut, she never ruled alone. But unlike Hatshepsut, she did not leave Egypt better than she found it. She left Egypt to become a province of the Roman Empire. She ruled alongside her father first, then alongside 2 brothers in succession whom she married, but whether or not she had sexual congress with each is unlikely because she had both of them murdered. And then she looked around for another male to rule with, and she picked a Roman warlord by the name of Julius Caesar. She was in Rome when he was assassinated on the steps of the Senate, and then she moved to Mark Antony, and they intended to create a dynastic succession of their own, using their own family, their own children, and Caesarion at the center of it. And if for the Battle of Actium, their loss at the Battle of Actium, they could have created that bastion of power in the Eastern Mediterranean. But of course, they lost the Battle of Actium. And now we talk about Cleopatra as a greedy woman, a woman who's interested in her own power and fame, who dissolves pearl earrings in glasses of vinegar. And we write plays about her, and Hatshepsut, her name we can't even pronounce. Boudica, I also don't have time. So I think you get my message, right? That a woman can gain power in a time period of crisis when something's gone horribly wrong. And so what I'm doing with this Hatshepsut book is essentially trying to rewrite the idea that women bring on the crisis, which is what a lot of the histories tell us, and instead say women are allowed into power only when there is a crisis. And now in the final 3 minutes, I think I have, or no minutes, 2 minutes, my God. I will quickly go through some of Hatshepsut's achievements, that she was the god's wife of Amun, a priestess at a very, very young age, and there she is being given life and power by the god Seth. That when her half-brother husband died, she was named as regent for her nephew, Thutmose III. It's an extraordinary thing that she was allowed to do this for her nephew and that the mother of the child was not. She then very cleverly and lawyer-like created the foundations of her kingship. And on this text here, we see that she calls herself the one to whom Ra, that would be the sun god, has actually given the kingship. So in those years of regency, she doesn't call herself king outright, but she says, look, he gave me the kingship. I'm doing the job, so what's the problem? Until eventually, she starts to depict herself, much like Sobekneferu before her, as a female, but layering the kingship on, using a masculine wig, using a masculine headdress, but with a female dress. And then she's crowned at or before year 7 of Thutmose III, her nephew, and rules alongside him. And as her reign continues, we see her creating an image of herself that is very masculine, that is gender bending, if you like. And the reasons for this, I think, are clear and fit into a patriarchal society model. This nephew of hers was 9 when she's crowned and is getting older by the day. And once he turns 16, she makes him an equal participant in her rule. He has the reins of the army. He has control over all of the military power in her reign. And she's here depicted first and looks like a man. Oops. And he's depicted, oh, what have I done? And he's depicted behind her. And they look like twins. It's almost like they're the same person. And that's the persona that she's trying to create. She's a jobs creator. She's in control of all of the money. She's paying out more from the royal treasuries than we've ever seen before, creating more positions, new positions than we've ever seen before, which makes it clear that Hatshepsut understands she has to give to get. She's not outright bribing people, but she's certainly making sure they're well paid for going along with this unusual system of rule. We don't have time to talk about Sen and Mut, but she makes sure that she names men to key economic posts who are loyal to her and only to her. And she makes sure that she has the priesthood in her pocket to such an extent that when she has herself named king, she makes sure that the oracle of the god Amun-Re is engineered to find her on a specific festival day so that the priests move towards her in a great public moment and she can throw herself to the ground before this oracle of the god and say to the god directly, oh, my father Amun, what would you have me do? And in this moment, she tells us, he marks her for kingship. She tells us that, look at what she's doing. She tells us that her father is the god Amun-Re outright, and these are her parents having sex. Isn't that sweet? Sexual moment, ancient Egyptian style. She creates international campaigns and brings an extraordinary amount of tribute into Egypt. She leads an expedition to Punt, not herself personally, but she puts it together and makes sure there's an oracle to support that as well. She brings back all kinds of details, like the Napoleonic savant. She makes sure that she sends people to draw all of the fish and make sure they bring all the details back of the people they met and the houses that they live in. She's an extraordinarily innovative builder, and her temple of millions of years in Luxor is one of the key highlights when you visit Egypt, and Luxor in particular. And I'm almost done. I seriously am, Jill. I'm so almost done. And she changes her image of kingship as she moves from a woman who wears the nemes of a king. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't mean to tilt her. To a woman who's depicting herself as a man, but with feminine arms, shoulders, and face, to a very masculinized image. Until finally, 25 years after her death and her burial in state, with respect, Thutmose III, her nephew and co-king, decides to have her removed from every temple space that he can find, has her statues smashed so that the Metropolitan Museum of Art had to put those together painstakingly from tiny little pieces. And so I will leave you with the cautionary tale that successful women are easily forgotten because the men who come after want to take credit for what she's done. And those women who are failures and who have done such a horrible job or have not left their place better than they found it, those are the women we lift up as cautionary tales. Thank you very much. Okay, questions? I know. That was a fast 45 minutes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. In doing case studies and cultural studies, when it's mostly qualitative research, and we know that there's biases that we bring as a researcher. So my question is sort of a two-part. One, what do you think you bring as a bias in your research as a researcher? And two, do you think that you are more qualified as a woman to report on such a fabulous woman as this?
Oh, that's a hard question. First of all, I wouldn't say that this is, it is a case study. I'm certainly bringing biases into it. If you read the introduction, you'll see some people have said I'm a little defensive when I talk about it. That essentially what I wanted to do with this book was bring humanity back to ancient Egypt and understand that the ancient Egyptians have created a divine kingship that sets these people up as superhuman. And that's the way we study them, and that's the way we talk about them. And I wanted to talk about how she might have felt or thought within the system that she's working with. I wanted to conjecture on human emotions. So I wouldn't call this a scientific study at all. I wouldn't even call it an anthropological study. I would call it an experiment in narrative and storytelling. And it's me trying to find the human nature in a place that doesn't talk about human nature of its leaders. And I was talking to the professors at the university today. You know, in ancient Rome or ancient Greece, you benefited by talking about people's humanity. So if Mark Antony has a triumph and you yell out the names of all of his lovers and girlfriends trying to bring him down a peg or two, this is useful to you and people write about it. Or if we talk about Tiberius and all of his little boys that he has at the palace, this is useful to you politically. In ancient Egypt, where you have divine kingship, we know none of such details. Hatshepsut is never going to have her boyfriends or girlfriends inscribed onto a sacred stone wall. It's not going to happen. So given that the Egyptian system, based on continuity and divine kingship par excellence, I wanted to try to find the humanity within a system that's blocking that from my gaze, that's constantly throwing the veil of ideology over it and saying these people are superhuman. And I'm pretty much saying, oh, no, they're not. Let me see what I can kind of find. So again, I don't think it's a scientific study. Now, the second part, being a woman. I would have said 10 years ago, no. But having had my son and gone through postpartum depression and anxiety and all that goes with it, and taking that time off and coming back, it's made me understand my biological, that my body can betray me, or that I can at least feel my body has betrayed me, because it's so hard to have a child and bring that child up, and I can't compete with the men in my department in terms of publication and other things. I don't have the time. Even if they do have kids, I don't have the time compared to what they have. I don't know what the reasons for that are. So, but I think that having had, and I only have one child, having had my son, I think I do understand what it means to juggle my biology, my interest in having a child with my femininity. I think it's harder for a man to understand. I don't think it's impossible, but I couldn't understand it until I had the child. So I don't think I just need to be a woman. I need to have been a woman who's procreated, if you like. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
What is the state of Egyptology in Egypt today?
It's a very colonial science. This is a very interesting question that you've asked, because Egyptology continues to be colonial. And if you go to Egypt today and you go to Karnak, you're like, oh, that's a French concession. And Deir el-Bahri, where Hatshepsut's Temple of Millions of Years is a Polish concession. And Medinat Habu is an American concession. And we still separate Egypt up into those different groups. Now, Egypt is ruled by Egyptians. It's not, the Ministry of Culture is not run by the French anymore, as it was pre-1950. But because Egypt, as a culture, it is now Islamic and Muslim, and because these things are considered haram and considered as opposed to God, right? It's not a study that Egyptians themselves are often interested in taking on. Having said that, I know many Muslim Egyptologists who are wonderful, amazing. And the current head of the current Ministry of Antiquities, Mamdouh el-Damati, got his PhD in Heidelberg and now is the Minister of Culture. But notice he got his PhD in Heidelberg, because that PhD from Germany is worth more than a PhD from Cairo. And that, I think, has to do more with money, funding. Egypt is a very poor country, and the best university in Egypt for Egyptology is American University, Cairo, but it's not a PhD granting institution. These are tricky questions, and most Egyptologists want to see more Egyptian academic interest in this study, but by the same token, ancient Egypt is something that draws people from all over the world. It is the world's first regional state. This is the crucible of complex civilization as we know it, and it's also this unique continuity that exists nowhere else on the planet. It draws people. I'm going to a conference in Florence in 2 weeks for the International Congress of Egyptologists, and there I will meet colleagues from Japan and France and Vienna and South America and North America and all over Europe and Egypt as well. So it still is a product of colonialism, but it's slowly becoming a more cooperative, globalized venture. And I'll leave it at that, if that answers your question. Yeah. Oh, run in heels. She's running in heels. You should never do that. Yes.
I've just read in the Wall Street Journal that over 50% of the population of Egypt is below the age of 25. Yeah. I'm wondering if the young Egyptians are as interested in their history as all of these other peoples from other nations are.
The Egyptians know that their history is their lifeblood. And in Egypt, you do not see as much religious fundamentalism that encourages the destruction of these objects, which is a wonderful thing. And in Egypt as a whole, you see fundamentalism, but not to the violent extent that you find it in Northwest Asia. There are many reasons for this. I go back to the map that I showed before and this geographic determinism. I'm not going to say that it's not, that terrorism can't come out of Egypt. It can. We know it can. But there's not a systematic interest in destroying monuments within Egypt by Egyptians. And that's a very good thing. This young population is interested in exploiting these objects for tourist interest, and that's a lifeblood of their economy. And things need to settle down politically, I think, to improve that. Tourism numbers go up, and then something will happen, and then they go back down again. That young population is problematic because there's not enough jobs for these people. It's an underemployed place. Does that answer your question? Yeah, fine. Okay. Yes.
On your picture of the woman king and her nephew, the child king,
yeah,
you say they're identical. So how do you know who's who?
So so here. Oh, can you hit the lights down a little bit? Is that hard? Can you put the lights down? We can do it. Maybe? No? Okay. I can tell by the hieroglyphs, and here we see Men Heper Re, so that's his cartouche right here for Tutmosis III, and Hatshepsut is Maatkare, or Re, you can say it either way, and so that's her cartouche and her throne name, and each of their throne names are represented. If I were just looking at their titles, she's called the King of Upper and Lower Egypt, or he of the sedge and the bee, and then she's called the Lord of Doing Stuff, which is a wonderful title. Essentially, it means that's what it is. Essentially means the chief ritualist. So she's the chief priest. He's marked as the good God, or the perfect God. That's the God sign. That's the good sign. Lord of the two lands. And both of them are given life. You guys know that one, right? Life, given life, and there's a jet, means forever. So she's given life forever, he's given life forever. And it's the text that differentiates them. But they both seem to be, she's hitting the chest. So everything's like a cartoon. It's all labeled. So what she's doing is she's hitting, and this word here is to strike. She's striking 4 times. You see the number 4. So it's Heti, Sep 4, air, and then it's the Iat chest, the great Iat chest. So she's striking the chests, these special weird chests, 4 times, 4 Amun Re, and then she's doing it in front of the altar as well. And then he's here holding an incense brazier, and he's doing, that's the word for doing incense it just says doing Senechur, Yirat Senechur. And so he's lighting the brazier, and they're both acting as ritualists together. But she's first, he's second. And as long as she's alive, she's always first. And there is a discussion, did he hate her? Was he mad about it? He must have known that if she did not exist, his dynasty would have stopped with him. He wouldn't have been given the chance to rule as king. She's the one that enabled him to do this. Otherwise, it would have moved to a new family, and the Thutmose dynasty would have stopped in his tracks. No talk of Amenhotep III, King Tut, Akhenaten. None of these kings would have made it into existence. Hatshepsut is the one that we have to thank for all of that. One more? One more. Who's the lucky person? I like the way you guys choose, and then I don't have to be the bad guy. It's good. But look, now they're fighting. Warlord.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I just wondered, I have a very simple question, but I wondered what led you to your interest or to become a professor in Egyptian art?
It's the most common thing that I'm asked, and it's rather unanswerable. And it's interesting. Egyptologists never ask themselves this question. We don't sit around at the bar and go, why'd you become an Egyptologist? I don't know, why did you? We just don't do it. It's almost treasonous to ask that question because nobody can understand it. I myself, I can't understand it. I don't know why I do this. I grew up in Houston, Texas, petrochemical daughter, right? What the hell am I doing? I go to the University of Texas. I get a humanities degree and a German degree. I find out that I can get a PhD in Egyptology. I'm done. I'm off to the races. And, I learned my French and my German, and I get all the things that I needed, and I have not stopped working like a crazy person since. And it never bores me. I'm constantly interested in these people. And I think most Egyptologists or people who have to study ancient people do this. I'm interested in economy. I'm interested in money. If it happened 3,000 years ago, then I want to know all about it. And so Egypt is it's my foray into understanding this crazy world around me. So I work on Egypt first, and then I look at the rest of the world and go, oh, that's crazy because of this patriarchal stuff, and this is why women don't have any power, but I need Hatshepsut to help me get there. And my coffins that I study, you saw me looking at that coffin in the first slide, I compare that in my mind to looking at a wedding dress. People compete in all kinds of crazy ways. The Egyptians used coffins in funerals to throw down and show that they could compete with the Joneses and that their family was incredibly important and could spend money. We use weddings and that outlay of cash, and then people show up and they're like, oh, filet mignon, okay, then I see who they are. And we all do it. It's just, I need to go to Egypt to understand this better for me. I hope that kind of answers it. It's kind of a non-answer. I'm sorry. Yeah. Oh, thank you. I can't help it. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Cooney, for joining us today, for talking about so many interesting things. I will tell you that we do have a fascination with Egypt. And here in Omaha, our wonderful scholars at this museum found some glass plate negatives, about 112 years old, Brandeis family in Egypt with the Sphinx partially covered in sand. They're amazing images. So if you get an opportunity to visit with Kellen Henriksen, Larissa Crayer, Carrie Meyer, and Bill Gonzalez, they can tell you a little more about those images. So again, thank you, Dr. Cooney.
Oh, did they turn me off? No, not yet. I can't talk to you
So
yet.
we will have our dessert reception upstairs.